Today we're going to look at a few albums that the Japanese managed to cock up, or at least the covers anyway. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, in England we use the word cock up to talk about mistakes. So 10 covers, Japanese covers, which were messed up in some way. We're going to start with Blue Hawaii. So the American album looked like that. And at the top here you can see that it says RCA Victor and then presents. So RCA Victor presents an original soundtrack album. And the Japanese mono pressing is fairly similar. So at the top here you've got Victor and then presents. So there's no problem with the mono album. But with the stereo album, what Victor were doing at the time was they had this living stereo banner across the top of the cover. So it left this great big space here. Now you can see the black letters here in Japanese. That says Blue Hawaii, and then you have a space, and then the word presents. So it's either Nothing presents an original soundtrack, or Blue Hawaii presents an original soundtrack. Either way, it's a bit of a mess. Now, in the 1970s, when they reissued it, somebody obviously spotted the mistake because they corrected it here. RCA presents. However, even in my country, they didn't do a particularly good job of the cover either. So if you look at this copy here from the 1960s, it's a little bit confusing. It actually looks like Elvis Presley presents an original soundtrack album. The RCA Records logo is over here on the right. So not perfect, but at least it's better than the big blank space. The next one to look at is Girls, Girls, Girls. And this is a mono copy from 1962 or 3, around about that time, one of the first ones. And this is a stereo copy from 1969, first RCA version. Now, if you look at the back covers, you need to just look at how long the Japanese title is on the top album compared to the one on the second album. Okay, so the large text at the top there in Japanese, that's the title of the album in Japanese, and you can see that on the top one it's slightly longer. So this one actually reads in Japanese Garuzu, 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 and the one at the bottom actually reads Garu, Garu, Garu. So both of them are correct in a way, because in Japanese they don't have a plural. So girl can mean one girl, or it can mean more than one girl. But why they changed the title from Garuzu, Garuzu, Garuzu to Garu, 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 I'm not sure. It could have been a mistake. But whatever the reason, they stuck with the second one. This is the 1982 version. The title appears here on the right side of the obi, reading from top to bottom, and they're sticking with Garu, 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 which in English would be girl, girl, girl. But as I say, it's not incorrect in Japanese, but for some reason they changed the title. The next album we're going to look at is Giant Blues. This one dates from around about 73, 74, and this was part of a series of 20 albums, which I have shown in another video. And all of those albums actually had the American front and rear cover art, which wasn't a problem for any of the other albums, but it was for this album, because the first song on the American album was, of course, Tonight Is So Right for Love, which is what it says here on the cover. However, the first song on all Japanese pressings of this album was actually Tonight's All Right for Love, the shorter song. It's a completely different song. So whoever was responsible for designing this cover, they obviously didn't know that the song on the record is not Tonight Is So Right for Love. Next up is Elvis Now. Now in the 70s, most of the album covers were pretty much the same as the American versions, front covers and back covers, certainly from 1974 onwards, from the Raison Rock album onwards. However, back in 1972, the Elvis Now album came out, and this was the front cover, same as the American version, and this is the back cover, a completely different version. Like a lot of albums at the time, it was released in a gatefold sleeve. and it wasn't available for very long like this, because the following year, in 1973, it was reissued in the same series of albums that GI Blues was in, the one that I just showed you a moment ago. And this is that reissue. This is a slightly later one from about 74. So this one here has the American back cover, so no problem there. So the problem lies with the Japanese back cover here. Now at the bottom, where my finger's pointing here, that's Elvis's name, and at the top it says Elvis Now, Elvis Presley, and in the middle you've got the song titles here. But if you count them down, there are actually only 9 songs. So one of the songs is missing, and it's actually Early Morning Rain. And a copy I had of this album until fairly recently, I sold it when I got this one. Somebody had actually written Early Morning Rain in Japanese on the back cover there. Very kind of them. Let's go on to Something for Everybody. So when Something for Everybody was first released, it was issued in 2 covers. One was a Japan-only design. I've got a copy of that, which I'll show you in an upcoming video. And the other design was the same as the American front cover design. When they reissued it on RCA in 1969, they only used the American front cover design. However, somewhere along the line, something went wrong with the image that they used for the front cover. And I'll try to show you this here. There's a diagonal line, which you can see from here, where my right hand is, and here, where my left hand is. There's a diagonal line running through Elvis's shoulder and up to the left side of the cover there. No idea how that happened, but they fixed it for the 1977 reissue. So you can only find it on this one here, the 1969 reissue. Now the next one I have to show you is the mono copy of King Creole from 1962. Now most people know that in Japanese they don't have an L sound, so they have to use an R instead of an L. And that may account for the mistake on the spine of this record here. I'll just put a picture up on the screen so you can see it, but it says King Creole by Elvis Presley. With the Girl Happy album, the Japanese went their own way and came up with this cover here, quite different from the American cover. However, they were a bit careless with the wording or the layout of the words on the front cover. So they've got Elvis here at the top, where it's most prominent, but then just below that it says Victor Presents. But Victor apparently is presenting nothing. It just reads Victor Presents in an original soundtrack album, so they're not presenting anyone. So probably this came about because whoever was designing it didn't really understand the meaning of the words they were putting on the cover. This is pretty generic wording on Elvis's 1960s soundtrack covers. The next 2 both have the same problem. Here's a compilation album from the 1980s called Rock and Roll Years. Now we all know that N is short for and, rock and roll. But what they've done on this cover is they've made rockin' into one word. So it's rock apostrophe N, Rock and Roll Years. And this album from 1977 has exactly the same problem. It's called Rock and Roll Album. You can't see the rock and roll because of the OB in the way, but that is written exactly the same. Rock apostrophe N. And the last one I've got to show you is the Elvis album. Now there are a couple of problems with this album. This is the 1973 pressing, and by that point the song titles were appearing on the front cover. But if you look at the end of When My Blue Moon Turns to Gold again, you can see that the N is not there. This is When My Blue Moon Turns to Gold again. Another problem that happened with this album, right from the very beginning, was they got the spelling of the song Rip It Up wrong. So this is the back cover of the mono album from 1962, and it says Rit It Up, R-I-T. Now that problem remained on this album right until 1985. So it was on the first album, and all the reissues right up until 1985 when they finally got it right. And going back to this album here in 1973, you can see they actually use the American back cover. So it's okay on this back cover because it's the American design. However, they still managed to make the mistake of calling it Writ It Up on the lyric sheet. Both sides as well. This is the lyric side. That says Writ It Up here. On the Japanese side, it says Writ It Up, R-I-T, in English up here. And on the Japanese first edition, they even called it Writ It Up in the Japanese liner notes. They managed to correct that on this 1962 reissue, but every single copy from 1957 to 1977, they all have Rip It Up spelt as Writ It Up. And just one more thing about this album, the second album. The first two pressings, both in mono, actually had Love Me before Rip It Up. So you might be able to see just below where my finger is, it says Love Me first and then Rip It Up or Writ It Up. On the stereo albums, they all had Love Me as the first track, same as the American albums. So there you go, the Japanese sometimes cocked up their sleeves. Very often there are mistakes in the lyrics, and sometimes there are mistakes on the song titles and one or two mistakes on the labels. I guess we should cut them a little slack because English is not their first language. Most Japanese people don't have a very good command of English, so I suppose it's inevitable that some of these mistakes would crop up from time to time. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there for today. See you next time. Take care.